All right, so we will call to order this meeting of the Curriculum and Instruction Subcommittee. If I could ask the clerk to call the roll.
Chairperson Martin?
Here.
Mr. Bahu?
Here.
Ms. Doherty?
Here.
3 present.
Thank you very much. So we have 2 reports. If I don't have the agenda right in front of me, I just have the reports. To talk about tonight, my understanding, we're going to do the student absenteeism first. Excellent. I'd defer to Ms. Desmond to kind of take us through the materials.
Great. So today's agenda is student absenteeism report, which was submitted to the school committee 2 meetings ago, and then also a response to a motion that was put on the school committee floor that has to do with literacy in Lowell Public Schools. So we thought it would be a good time to do an overview of that as well. So we will start with the student absenteeism report. You all have the reports in your packets. The report is an overview of what has been happening this year in the Lowell Public Schools to try to reduce the chronic absenteeism rates that have significantly increased since 2020 across the state. This is not unique to Lowell. But what we have done in Lowell is we have developed a student resource office. Initially, that office was developed a year ago to address and target dropout rates and sort of re-engage students and families and develop pathways for students to be able to complete their high school path and receive a credential. And this year, what we've done as we have sort of worked through this new office is we've recognized that a lot of the work that they are doing in the Student Resource Office around dropouts parallels the work that our attendance office was doing to address chronic absenteeism. And we recognize that students who tend to be chronically absent oftentimes are the same students that have been dropping out. And so what we decided to do is combine the efforts and streamline the department so that the focus is on trying to eliminate the chronic absenteeism so that we don't get to a point of dropout. And so this report highlights all of the great work that's been going on. I have our director of the Student Resource Center, which is Lauren Campion, here today. I also have Heather Ganley, who is our attendance officer and oversees our attendance monitors and the great work that's being done daily to try to encourage greater attendance in the schools on a daily basis. And Yvette Crowell, who has also joined the Student Resource Officer. Yvette was a former social worker in our schools and has been working with families for a significant amount of time. And so the combined efforts, as you see in the report, have led to sharp reductions in chronic absenteeism in a lot of schools, but we also recognize that there are places for growth. There's opportunities to improve chronic absenteeism, and so they are here to share some of the work that's going on right now and then also answer any questions you may have about the report. So I am going to introduce Lauren to the microphone, and she will take over from here.
Hi, everyone. We'll do a very, very brief overview. We won't go through line by line. Hopefully, you've had a chance to look through it, and we can answer any questions afterward. So the Student Resource Center is, it's an attempt to support school staff and schools to engage their students and improve outcomes that are associated with student engagement, like attendance, behavior, and course performance, the ABCs of student engagement. And we are shifting from what started as a reactive approach to our hundreds of dropouts that we've had since the pandemic started. And we finally feel like we've gained a lot of traction in the school-based teams. They're hitting the ground running at the start of this school year, coming off of a district-wide improvement in our chronic absenteeism rates. It's the only accountability metric that DESE measured where we improved district-wide substantially. And I think that's a testament to the school-based teams that are supported very strongly by our attendance office here at Central. And I'll let Heather explain a little bit about that, about the work that the attendance office does.
Hi, Heather Ganley, the Supervisor of Attendance for the district. And again, just to start with our attendance teams at every school. They are, there's a dedicated school-based attendance team that looks at all of the students and reviews absences and sort of our chronic absence level at the school. And they, are guided through the district attendance intervention plan, which sort of outlines steps, in order to sort of work through the data and look at the students and try to understand what the problem is or what the reasons for them to not be attending as often as they are, and sort of get through that information and kind of come up with an intervention plan that will work for them. There's so many students that actually this year we created this attendance intervention tool. So now we're watching we have students on the list, and then we're sort of watching how are these interventions working? Are they improving? How do you measure improvement if you're not measuring, minus or gains in attendance? So it's really important to not just throw everything at it. It's really important to look to see, is this intervention making a difference in the students, attending? We also, if you can, even in just going on page 4, there's sort of tracking. We always start with tracking quarters. We have tracked our chronic absence rate from, I've been here almost 12 years, so for 12 years at this point, so I can show them quarters. We were doing it monthly during the pandemic because that was super important to look at. Very extreme amount of work to run that kind of data. So I'm glad we're back at quarters. But you can just see the difference and the changes. I mean, some of the schools are showing 21% decrease in chronic absence rate, which is the green alge. They're highlighted there for you. We've got the Washington, McAuliffe, you can see it in front of you. Another tracking measure for us that we looked at were the schools that had active community schools model and support in their schools. All of the ones that did have that, average decrease was 14%. And then, overall, this information and sort of being able to look at the change is great because we can understand where we are and where we need to improve and sort of develop more interventions and plans for them. So, I'm sure you have questions.
Yeah, before we pause for questions, I also want to point out the integral role of the attendance monitor position in this work. So Heather's the supervisor of attendance, and then we have 3 attendance monitors based at central office and 1 position at Lowell High School that's been vacant. It's been filled by 3 different individuals, and the ones at central are unfortunately in danger of being left because the rate of pay is pretty low. It's, I think, one of the lowest paid. And the biggest differentiation in the wage study that was just brought out from what we're paying them in Lowell Public Schools to what other districts are. So it's base pay of $38,000 for this role. And I think we should, highlight the work that they're doing. They're supporting the schools. Every single school in the district has improved chronic absenteeism, and it has not been easy. They provide the capacity building at the school team level, and then also they do the tier 3 work when the schools tried everything and moved through the steps of their intervention plan. The attendance monitors are the one who then work on things like court diversion programs, have family meetings with community agencies, home visits by the hundreds throughout the year. So I think it's important to highlight that.
And I just want to point out on the home visits, it's based on we're looking at a roadmap for each child. So we know who this child is. We know how many, at the high school level, how many credits they have, where the disengagement started, how they're doing in their courses. So, it's not just someone coming to the home and saying, hey, you're going to be in school. What's going on? And it's not truancy. This is extreme disengagement. So throwing the courts at it as well, and most of the high school students are outaged any of that, 16, and the courts won't even take these applications at this point because there's so much disengagement. So I just want to point out that it's intense. I don't even want to call it home visits anymore. It's family engagement because that's what it takes to be in the neighborhoods and the homes and working with families to help them understand we can help.
Yeah. So pretty essential work, and DESE, the state, has commended Lowell Public Schools, invited us to present on a lot of statewide panels and show the work that we do with our attendance office here as a model of success. So just want to highlight that and thank the attendance office for that. And then one last thing we'll review is Yvette Crowell will talk about what she does as a district support specialist, in particular how we use ESSER funds to support school-based interventions by giving mini grants to schools.
Okay. Hi, can you hear me okay? Because I know I have a soft voice. So one of the things that we really try to do in the Student Resource Center, again, is support schools with student engagement and be proactive in helping them find ways to connect students and keep them in school. So we've offered schools the opportunity to apply for mini grants, and we have awarded that to several schools semester 1 and semester 2. Some of the programming that has come out of those mini grants are Check and Connect, which is an intervention. Students are identified based on attendance, behavior, and coursework. So once we identify those students, we connect them with mentors. We've used community mentors, especially at the Freshman Academy, or students can identify a go-to person that they have connected with in the past, an adult in the building. Some of the schools that have done Check and Connect, Butler did it last year, and it had proven to be successful and help with student re-engagement. This year, the Butler has done it again, the Bartlett, the Robinson, and the Freshman Academy. And other houses at Lowell High School are coming on board for second semester. So we really, through this intervention, we really want to help kids identify a go-to person in the building, because we find that that really does help connect kids to wanting to go to school. Other interventions have been the SOCLOSA, for example, did a peer mentoring program where they use the upperclassmen to work with the underclassmen to help with school student re-engagement. So those are just some of the examples of what the schools have done with the mini grants to help with student engagement.
Yeah, we thought that was a creative use of ESSER funds and a way to support schools' capacity to go through the motions of applying for a grant, that they could receive up to $5,000. And then also they had to show a plan and show why their intervention was evidence-based. They couldn't just make something up, but they actually had to show the evidence of how it might affect student outcomes like their attendance, behavior, grades, graduation rate, climate and culture in the building, stuff like that. So that's just one of the many things we do. We also do a lot of intensive outreach and case management through our graduation mentor program. Our hundreds of students who have dropped out in the past few years, as well as hundreds more who are chronically absent. And the schools have tried, multiple tiers of intervention, and then our office then does intensive case management for those that are referred to our office. So that's pretty much, just a small snapshot of what we do, and the rest is in the report, if there's any questions.
Oh, thank you. So I don't know if I was in line. I think you guys
First of all, I want to thank you all for the work. I think the report was very complete. It covered a lot of areas. It certainly was encouraging to see the kind of movement we've made, but to also, it's shocking still what we have for chronic absenteeism. And I guess I have a couple of questions, if that's okay. I want to start with the attendance monitor position, just because you all had mentioned it. So if I understand correctly, we currently have 3 attendance monitors who are based out of Central but work for all the K-8 schools, right?
Yep, they have caseloads of the different
K
schools.
broken up, right?
K through 12, yep.
Well, I thought the high school had their own person.
They haven't been able to
To fill it, yeah.
So they've had people come, but they don't stay. So just if we could stop on that moment. We've created a bunch of new positions in the last few years in particular, and I'm always one of these sticklers, like, what are the requirements? How does it justify the salary? And I have to say, a starting salary of $38,000 seems incredibly low. This is a position that requires a college degree, is that correct?
Yes, they all do, yep.
So you're requiring a bachelor's degree, and is it a full-time position?
Yes.
School year.
So where is it on,
So the 180,
191, 96.
196, it's a 196.
so it's a school year position, they're not working in the summer. But how does it compare with some of our other school year positions?
Well, if you compare with the caseworker position at the bridge, that would be in the 60s at least.
Oh, that's in the 60s.
Yeah.
So I think we need, and are you asking for more of these positions? Because I know, I specifically asked when I put the motion forward, give us an update of where we are with this issue, because I knew our previous committee, we had invested, we saw that it was an issue that wasn't going away, and we said, let's put some resources behind it. So I was looking for a check-in, how we're doing, and I'm, like I said, I'm impressed to see the movement I've seen. But the other piece of it that was very important to me is, where are the gaps? Is this one that you're saying we need another one of these, or another?
No, I think we need to incentivize the wonderful staff we have and to stay in the roles. We're losing one of them as we speak to DCF, and I think it's important to have people who speak multiple languages in the role, which we have two.
So DCF, I wouldn't think is paying huge money there.
Well, they're, yeah, yep.
Sure.
So, I think we've done some analysis of what these positions in other districts get paid, and we are significantly below the market rate.
Right.
We do look to hire staff that represent our families and students.
Definitely.
Staff that can communicate with, some of the majority high incident languages. And I think what we're saying is that in order to be competitive, we do need to look at the current salary. That may help us fill the open position at the high school. So adding new positions, we're seeing that, we can't even get applicants for the positions we have.
Got it.
So I think that's really what we're saying.
Okay.
It's hard to make a good assessment if we need more, because we
Right.
can't even fill the positions
Right.
we have.
Okay, so that's fair. I think we'd be looking at paying a competitive wage and filling the positions we've already funded. Okay, so good to know that. If I can quickly jump to a couple of other questions, because I don't want to take up the whole meeting. When we looked at the breakdown on page 4, you could see some schools had really, as you pointed out, made great improvements. I'm wondering, like Lowell High and the Starclosa were on the low end. What would you attribute that to? Have they not had the same amount of supports, or?
So if I could speak to the Stadlosa first, you have to look at actually their rate. The Stadlosa has actually been doing a great job, and they're at a lower rate to begin with.
Okay.
So I'm seeing a 4% decrease, but right now, again, this was just as of the first quarter. They're even lower. But again,
Their improvement the previous year was really high.
Got
really
it.
high.
Okay,
So
so,
they're relatively, and they're in the same range, as you can see, with other middle schools, minus the daily.
right. So the high school,
Yep.
big
that's-
problem, right?
Yep.
And those are the kids that we really lose because they become dropouts. What do we need to be doing at the high school that we're not doing? Or maybe if we had that position filled, that would help.
Yes, definitely. I think, you might want to talk about, sort of what we've created, sort of for the students to come back to.
Yeah, I
Because
think-
that's really,
I think we're doing a lot of work with Lowell High in partnership with them on trying to find pathways internally rather than diverting them to our alternative education programs, which are full. And last year graduated about 17% of the seniors through alternative ed. So we're trying to find ways for Lowell High School to be able to graduate more of their students by creating kind of internal alternative pathways. Because the need has just changed. It's a changed, student population than from before the pandemic. We didn't have all the barriers of economic barriers, mental health barriers at such a high volume as we do now. So the more flexible pathways that we can offer within Lowell High, things like credit recovery periods scheduled during the daytime. They use work study periods for students who have to work, but they have to require certain checkpoints and, proof of work. We have, more use of social workers who are, we have increased social workers in the building. And I think that's been important just to address the extreme volume of students who need those extra supports to get through their school day. And, anything that we can do to support the team there, that's our main focus. I think the majority of our work is with Lowell High School.
And I just want to also say, we are at Lowell High weekly, our team. And so we're in every house every week working with the team and looking at the students. So it's not like the high school's not receiving any work from the attendance department either. I mean, we're always there. It's just that, unfortunately, our students are graduating from alternative programs and or seeking alternative education, as in GED or HiSET, and passing. So you're seeing it, sort of pull away from the high school. Like Lauren was saying, we definitely need internal supports to keep them there so that they can finish and get a high school diploma.
Thanks for this report. It's really extensive. I read it multiple times, and there's a lot of information here. And of course, I'm pretty new here, and I thank everybody for showing up because we wanted to have a Zoom meeting, but I was the guy that sort of pushed away from the Zoom meeting. I felt like it would be a little bit more informative if we were all met together, so thank you all for that. I guess my first question is, the hall monitor of Lowell High School that we don't currently have. And I've heard you say that the hall monitors are visiting
The
homes.
attendance monitors.
The attendance monitors are visiting homes, in the K through 8, but we don't have a K through 12. Do we have an attendance monitor that's visiting the high school?
Yes.
You are as well. And you're just sort
Ideally-
of sharing with the parents. And I heard you say hundreds of visits, and I'm sure it's hundreds of visits realistically per month.
Absolutely.
Right, right. So we're doing that, and we're trying to engage with the parents, right?
Yep.
Right, and then unfortunately, the kids just seem not to be coming to school. Is that correct?
There's also
Yes.
different scenarios, but yes,
Okay.
for the high school.
Okay, so that's being addressed. And I like the idea of, students having peers to sort of, go to, like you started over at the Stock LOSA, where my kids went to school. They had a peer, and, they sort of started, they called it a buddy system. And it started, when they got into high school in the 9th grade, junior, they would get attached to a junior in high school. They're sort of attended and stuff like that. Would that be something that maybe we could start at the high school? Would that be something that could work? Or, because that doesn't really cost any money, right? It does take time and effort.
So I do know that Lowell High just started an ambassador program. So we have a lot of newcomers coming in from different countries. This is not the main focus, but students new to the school are paired with an ambassador to help acclimate them and help with the transition to the high school. But that is a brand new program.
Okay, so it's something that's just being implemented.
Yes, and again, that's for new students to the high school. As far as the peers connection with students, that is what we're working on too through the mini grants. So again, the Freshman Academy did the Check and Connect program, but that is with an adult mentor, and other house offices would like to come on board and start this program as well. It's an 8-week program where we partner them with an adult, again, to have a go-to person in the school that they can connect with. But that is not a peer program. The ambassador is more of a peer program for the new students.
Okay.
And I also want to point out that this office works in concert with the staff at the schools. So social workers, assistant principals, house dean / assistant principals now all take part in connecting with families, doing family outreach and student outreach to try to bring students back. I think what is really important, and Dr. Campion mentioned, is that we have to think more flexibly around how students access coursework and scheduling. And I think that's something that we have been having discussions with the high school teams around, because the traditional block scheduling, does not seem to meet the needs of all of the student profiles that are here at Lowell High School. We have also brought in our mental health department to work with freshman academy staff on school avoidance behavior, because sometimes attendance is, or lack thereof, is connected to school avoidance behaviors. And many times it has to do with mental health issues, anxiety, and some other things that in the past we maybe wouldn't focus so much on, but we recognize that the need is getting greater and greater. And so we have been working with McLean Hospital to provide professional development to our freshman academy staff. And I will say nationwide, we really see 9th grade as a grade where we see chronic absenteeism spike. And so we recognize that as well. Partially because of the transition from 8th grade to 9th grade, and then also based on the needs of the age range and the developmental needs of the students. So I think what we've been saying is we really need to be looking or thinking outside the box when it comes to ways to provide academic experiences to our students so that they are continually engaged and looking forward to participating.
Sure, and it seems like the Check and Connect realistically is outside the box, and I'm sure that it's working really well. I'm just thinking, peers of other students saying, hey, Tom, welcome to the school, I'm Mike, why don't we sort of have lunch together once a month or something like that, and we sort of get together. I think that could be fairly helpful. I notice there's absenteeism, chronic absenteeism on Fridays. I think we all love a Friday off, and I guess the kids have caught on to that pretty rapidly themselves. Is there anything we could sort of do about maybe Fridays themselves? And I'll just come up with a thought of mine. Could we have like an ethnic food Fridays? Because I know we're an ethnic sort of, type of school district. And I'm not sure if, people could get excited by, their type of lunches being shared, or, something of that type, only because Fridays are, it's one day out of the 5. And when you're sort of missing Fridays pretty regularly, you're missing, could be 20% of the school year. Any thoughts on the Fridays?
I think it's a great idea. I love that. Yeah. Have our own food truck. Do food truck Fridays.
Food, I agree. However you want to do it.
Yeah, anything that would incentivize a student to want to come to school on a Friday, that could be it.
Sure, like a tacos on Fridays, right? Or, some type of, Chinese or Asian food, some type of African food. Pizza, I always know pizza was always a big hit on a Friday, when I went to school. But anyway, I think that's it. And then, of course, I had this written, but it sounds like we're going to sort of create this. Washers and dryers. Is that an issue where kids would, want to come to school more because they feel like that is an offering that the school gives to them and they could sort of get their own laundry done and such like that? And I know we're about to start that at the Butler School, which I think is a great idea, but any thoughts on that?
Yes, that would be a great use of our community school strategy where we're trying to support our students and families and even community members potentially in the future. Having washers and dryers in schools can address issues that students might face, barriers to why they may not want to come to school without clean clothes. Oftentimes they'd have high school students saying they're not at school because they have to do laundry that day, spend all day at the laundromat. So I think that's definitely part of our community school strategy where we look to extend the borders of what we consider traditional teaching and learning in the school to a more wraparound, holistic type of place for students.
Okay, great. That covers my questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could you help me as I'm looking at on page 4, and I'm focused more on the high school than anything else, to be honest, but the real numbers that we're looking at the percentages I think is really helpful, but having a sense of what the real numbers are in terms of the number of students that 42% represents as opposed to 37%. See, I'm going to ask you to do math. Sorry about that.
absent? That was in 2022, and then so we were
Mhm.
close to 1,000 maybe last year.
And chronically absent is defined by the Department of Ed as 10% of the overall required days. So 180 days, if you're chronically absent, you'd be absent 18 days in the school year.
Mhm.
And so what we track is that 10% quarterly.
Right.
So a quarter is 45 days.
Right.
So you'd be chronically absent if you've been absent 4.5 days. So I think, at the beginning of the year, we tend to have pretty large numbers, but when you think about, getting to November and you've been in school since September,
Right.
4.5 days, it's something that we do see, we see kids absent 5 or 6 days. Sometimes if you get an illness.
Yeah,
you're
that's
out
a week.
you're out
Yeah.
And so, I think, we really try to look at how do we put in strategies in place to sort of help kids that are on that cusp, lower
Mhm.
that rate before they get to the 180th day.
Right.
And then also try to re-engage students that are well beyond the 18. So, just as we're looking at numbers, just trying to sort of put it in perspective, the halfway point is 9.5 days. And so some of the students here could be at 10 days absent,
Mhm.
others could be 50 days absent.
Right.
Right.
That's the minimum.
So, but in these numbers, it's anything that is that 10%.
Minimum and up.
And it's for the full year. Like these are year-end numbers.
These are
Okay.
year-end numbers.
Okay. Okay. With the mini grants program, would that be something that we'd be looking at during budget season to keep going for next?
Yes, so I think you may remember at the end of budget season, I presented a student resource center budget
Mhm.
and a breakdown of how that dollar amount
Yep.
was. There was an allocation in the budget for a certain dollar amount.
Right.
And the question, I believe it was Committee Member Doherty asked the question, what is the breakdown of this large dollar amount?
Right.
So we presented a budget that broke down what the positions were. One is a community schools position at the Career Academy, along with, I think it was a math teacher position, just recognizing that that is a school where we're trying to re-engage a lot of students and keeping them coming. And then also, there was a breakdown of all of the resources that we're utilizing throughout the year to make improvements, and that's where that piece fell.
Mini grant.
That mini grant piece. So you did approve a budget for that dollar amount in a larger budget.
So my question is, would we be looking at a similar amount for next year? Okay.
We would like to increase the dollar amount for
Okay.
that particular resource.
Great.
But, we're not a budget.
Take what we can get.
But there's a significant number of items and initiatives that were in that budget, and we have found a lot of value in having those resources for our schools.
And how many total did you distribute? They were 5,000?
We've had 18 grants distributed to date. That includes some from the prior school year.
Okay.
We started in the second semester of last school year.
And these were driven by school personnel? That's great.
And it is a research-based
Yeah.
program. It's nationwide, the model, and, I think the approach to it is trying to utilize something that has already had success outside
Mhm.
school.
We like to see what some schools do and they find success and they have to give a report to us to show us what outcomes they have, and then we try to encourage other schools. Here's an example of what
Right.
this school's doing. It doesn't have to be the Check and Connect program. It could be, restorative justice, it could
Mhm.
be attendance recovery during the breaks. They did that buyback.
Where did they do that? Just at the high school, or?
Actually, the STEM was very successful.
Oh,
Them and
Yeah.
Butler, Lowell.
Butler.
okay. Beautiful. All right. I don't know if there are any other questions.
I'm just wondering what would be the next step regarding the monitor position if we wanted to review.
I think we'd need to get a recommendation for a revised job description and salary level, which I
So
think
I
we
would-
would probably be very
What?
happy to get.
So is that in the way of a motion? I would ask for that, or?
You could, or the administration could do it on their own
Okay.
as part of this report. It's how it worked during budget season. If you would like to make a motion, we
I
can do
would.
that too.
Move that we get an update on the job description for the attendance monitor with recommended changes, including compensation.
And that's for
More
all
than
the
that?
attendance.
Well, my only thing is that if we can vote on that here now, then it needs to go to the full committee to be
Right.
voted on. So you might want to make it as a motion at the next meeting,
Oh,
as opposed
okay.
to burying it in a
As
subcommittee.
kind of a subcommittee
Yeah,
report?
exactly.
Okay. But I'm hoping we'll be discussing this at the next meeting
We should
anyway.
be. We will have the minutes.
Keeping this or withdrawing? You keeping this motion?
No, I'm going to take Ms. Martin's suggestion and make it as a formal motion, but I would include any information,
Perfect.
that we discussed it here when we talk about it.
Yeah, that makes
That
sense,
would be
yes.
for all attendance monitors, correct?
Yeah.
Not
Yes.
just-
To
yes.
increase the,
just
yeah.
one little-
Oh, yeah, no, for the position, for it.
Okay, across the board, nice and
Yeah.
even, everybody's happy.
I don't know when that happens, but sure. All right, so that would be, if there were no other questions on the attendance report, I would like to thank all of you for staying tonight to share this with us. The efforts are very important, and it's about a portion of our population that we need to pay particular attention to. So we thank you very much for that work.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Moving on to our second topic, which is the literacy report. I do believe this is a result of a motion I had made at a last meeting or the meeting before. Basically, oh,
Speaker, I don't know how that works. I'm sorry.
that's okay.
My name is Joy Flanders, and I've been a teacher here in Lowell for over 30 years.
Take a mic so we can get it.
This presentation that you're going to see tonight, some teachers had brought some concerns. So I'm representing the teachers at the Greenell School that feel very passionate about what they do and about the literacy program. And what you're going to see tonight, literally when I looked at it, I was like, holy cow, we do all that. And then we have to find time for math, social studies, and science. I was just blown away by what we do. So to see it in that PowerPoint presentation was eye-opening. I'm sharing with you some points that the teachers made from the Greenell School and how we all feel about one particular reading and writing and requires us to use them. These curriculums are not research-based and are not structured literacy. They are balanced literacy with a new label on them. A quick Google search will find many scholarly articles stating this. In fact, this curriculum has been banned in states across the country and has been deemed hurtful to students. It is no longer on the state of Massachusetts list as a curriculum option. This is not what our students need. Our students need a knowledge-based curriculum that follows the science of reading, a curriculum that builds background knowledge, vocabulary, and comprehension skills, along with a foundational skills curriculum that follows the science of reading. We as teachers would like input in the curriculum we teach, as we did in our phonics program. We would just like to be heard. Okay? Thank you.
that's all I have.
Okay, so to set the stage for the meeting, as I was saying, my motion was driven by getting some input from some of the some recent Boston Globe articles, some other community members who had reached out to me regarding kind of the conversation, the ongoing conversation between balanced and structured literacy. So I'm looking forward to a real class tonight. So my question was to be able to compare and contrast. There's a great deal of information. I plan to go through all of it. So let's get started.
Great. Melissa Newell, who is our coordinator for ELA and literacy, is here. And this presentation is a presentation around all of the aspects of literacy that are currently in Lowell Public Schools K through 8th grade.
Good evening, everyone. You asked for a class, and I'm going to try to do my best
Great.
to do that. I think your meetings are supposed to be about an hour, and we're already at 47 minutes, so I'm going to do it as best I can, as quick I can.
Don't rush through it.
This is a course in terms of material that we've offered teachers at 36 hours, that we gave leaders a 4.5-hour version, and that coaches are doing ongoing. So tonight we're going to address the motion that you brought forth. The things that we will cover are the sort of context in Massachusetts and Lowell and how we've gotten to where we're at right now. We will briefly talk about the science of reading because I don't know that everyone knows what that is. And we will talk about the science of reading as a social media movement as well. We will talk about the Department of Ed's curriculum and instructional expectations, our reading curriculum and instruction here in Lowell, the professional learning, our assessments and interventions, and then how high-quality materials are actually determined by the Department of Ed and what that means currently. So I know that's a lot, but you really couldn't answer the motion without giving you all of the pieces. And so I wanted to make sure you have as much information as possible. And then know that anything that you hear tonight, if you have more questions, we're happy to talk longer, more, again, about different pieces. So the historical context in Massachusetts is on this slide, and in 2017 we realigned the Mass frameworks. So we do use Common Core, but we use the Massachusetts version, which has 10% addition or changes from the Common Core. That's how all states were allowed to proceed. So we use the Mass ELA frameworks. The subject matter framework started to get revised in 2018 and 2019. And then the Department of Ed launched a new early literacy initiative called the Mass Literacy Guide in 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic. Knowing that they launched that, they also offered some dyslexia guidelines that shifted in 2021. And so we started to make shifts right around the pandemic in 2021, and I would say even right before then, to align with the dyslexia guidelines because we knew they were coming. The dyslexia guidelines are actually now dyslexia early literacy screening regulations. And so when that finally went into effect July 1st of this year from the Department of Ed, Lowell was fine to take on that new early literacy screening initiative because we had already made all the shifts for that. So that's the historical context of that in Massachusetts. In Lowell, in 2011, we started to move from Reading Street, a Basel Reader Anthology, to homegrown units of study, and this was during Race to the Top work. So we did at that time purchase teacher college materials for writing at our K-2 and our 3-5 schools, and those were in those big grade spans. K-2 all got the same materials, 3-5 all got the same materials. We used the Race to the Top money starting around 2012 to start to revise our reading units to move away from the Basel Anthology. Our data was showing that that wasn't working. Then we moved slowly, rolling out a unit at a time, sort of, through the units of study for reading to replace the teacher-written or resource-cobbled units that we had built with Race to the Top. So we recognized that some of those had some gaps in some areas that we weren't expertise, and we started to move towards the reading units of study. We also bought a phonics program for all of the schools because phonics has always been part of balanced literacy, and we bought Fountas and Pinnell phonics for K through 3 at that time. So we've slowly purchased these along the years, the units of study, the phonics program, and rolled them out very slowly and strategically with PD for teachers every time we launched a new unit. And they would come and we would have large groups of teachers collaborating across schools. And then the pandemic hit. And the Mass Literacy Guide at the same time, and all of this evolving research. So we recognized that as the dyslexia guidelines were coming, that we needed some new assessments, and we also needed some different programming. We had bought the Fountas and Pinnell phonics, but it left 2 paths of choice for teachers when they were making decisions about where to go instructionally, and that was proving to be challenging. So we wanted something that was more structured, that was evidence-based, and that was a curriculum that we could purchase that teachers could follow. At that point, we had some schools who had piloted programs. Some schools had piloted Foundations. Some schools had piloted Letterland. And as we moved forward with making a purchasing decision, we sort of let schools pick between those 2. So we do not have all of our elementary schools using every single the same phonics programming. We let the schools decide between those 2. The balance right now is 5 schools with Foundations, and that is partially approved by Ed Reports. And Letterland has 10 schools, and that has not yet been evaluated. It's actually not slated for evaluation until the year 2025.
And those all went in place in this current school year in September?
No, they started in around 2020 at some schools, and then we've been slowly rolling it up. So this year was our final year of making sure that anyone had phonics K through 3. So 3rd grade may not have had a solid program in place before this year, especially if they were not using the Fountas and Pinnell phonics. And then the last piece of that timeline is as the research evolved and continued to grow, the units of study, which were already slated for revision, were released with new models, and we used those in grades 1 through 2, and we purchased those to replace the old units. We did not purchase them for K because we don't use the units of study in kindergarten. We use a focus on kindergarten model at all schools except for the greenhouse across the district, and that's based off of Boston's play-based model. So we purchased the revisions for the grades that we actually already used, that we didn't buy it for someone who wasn't using it. You want me to keep going, or do you want to?
Yeah.
Okay. So the science of reading, here's Scarborough's rope. Scarborough's rope posits that these are all of the various pieces that are required for students to learn to read. And so you'll see there's 2 domains, the language comprehension and the word recognition. And those are interwoven to create skilled readers, and that goal is comprehension. So if you look at them, you can see all of the various components of language comprehension. That does include background knowledge, vocabulary, language structures, verbal reasoning, and literacy knowledge. And then the word recognition side, which is phonological awareness, decoding, and sight recognition. I do want to be clear that we don't believe in Lowell that the science of reading is just phonics, nor does Scarborough's rope, but that often gets confused in the media. So we need both domains all woven together to get to skilled reading, which is comprehension. I say that because if any of those pieces are frayed, comprehension is not as strong. So that's why we have the Scarborough's rope model. Then we have the simple view of reading, and that takes those 2 domains, word recognition and language comprehension, and says if you have them both, you will get reading comprehension. The reason that that is a multiplication problem is because if one of those was 0 in math, you would end up with 0. So you need both to be able to get to the reading comprehension. That's why it's not a plus sign, it's a multiplication sign. What does that look like? It looks like this. Word recognition is the bottom chunk, language comprehension is the top, goal, all the kids are readers, reading comprehension, okay? The problem with that view, and the one that we've advanced from, is that it doesn't take into account students and some of the other factors that come into learning to read. And so Nell, Duke, and Cartwright's model, which is the one that is here, the active view of reading, is the view of reading that we actually use. It still incorporates all of the components of Scarborough's rope and the simple view of reading. That's that middle blue, purple, pink part. But it adds in the critical components, particularly for students, of motivation, executive functioning, and ability to access curriculum. So you can't do all of the rope and the language comprehension and the word recognition and all of those pieces if the kids aren't motivated, if they don't have the executive functioning skills. All of it creates the reader. And so that's why we prefer the active view of reading, because it's more advanced compared to the simple view and just using Scarborough's rope. So what does that mean? There's a lot of research out there. This changes, I will tell you, daily. Like if you asked me to present today, I would include 5 different resources that have come out in the last week alone. So we are on top of this. The phone does not stop. Have you seen this article? Have you seen this researcher? Have you seen this? We are carefully weighing all of the pieces to figure out what is the best course of action. How do we proceed? And so Dr. Milner has spoken. That's Dr. Milner on the screen. And he is talking about that motivation piece. We cannot talk about students learning to read without talking about, are they introduced and encouraged to read texts that are meaningful to them? And so are students having access to texts where they see themselves, they can see others, and they can have a reading mirrors, windows, and sliding glass door moments? I think one of the strongest strengths of Lowell and the resources we've provided over the years has been our text. We have spent lots of money on really high quality, inclusive titles for students across all different aspects of life. And so one of Milner's critiques of some of these lists that come out is that who decides which books or topics are on the lists or in the curriculum don't always include our educators of color. Then we have Dr. Duke. Dr. Duke is the one who was a co-writer of the Active View of Reading, and she just wants to caution that the science of reading has to include implementation science. So when we say, are we doing the science of reading? We're not doing the science of reading. Science of reading is a body of research. We're teaching readers. And so we have to be careful that we're not oversimplifying what the science of reading actually is. And so we have to think about what does that mean when it's put into practice. And that's confirmed by the next slide, which is the teaching reading. So when you hear a lot about the science of reading and the programs that are associated with the science of reading, we have yet to see very little studies or research about the teaching of reading. So we have brain research and we have implementation science, and we don't yet have any studies where those two have been brought together. There are no efficacy studies, not for any of our programs for the most part. So to give you like a quick snapshot, and I don't love binaries because I think those get us in a pickle in any aspect of life, but the science of reading includes all of the components of reading. It's not just phonics. There's research that is evolved and grows all the time. So science, by definition, is not settled. What it is not is a program or an intervention you can buy. It's not phonics only, and it's not done. Like, we haven't figured out the answer. I will tell you, if you do research really far back, everything we're talking about now has been talked about before. The cycle continues to happen. We had the National Reading Panel, we had No Child Left Behind, we had a lot of pieces that did similar research. And so we want to make sure that we are talking about the science of reading in terms of what it is, and not the science of reading movement that has grown via social media and often misinformation. So when you see it that it's just phonics, that is misinformation. The next slide, if it was interactive here, would show you the hundreds of articles that pop up from journalists every single day including, as you mentioned, Ms. Martin, the Boston Globe is running an expose. That Boston Globe writer did the same expose in her last state. It's piggybacking off of other journalists. There's a lot of different opinions out there about this work, and that's why they're called the reading wars. Just recently, another journalist published an entire piece about why the media is missing this, and so we've got a lot of different sides. I will tell you that when we think about the science of reading in terms of the movement and not the actual facts, they suggest that all reading struggles can be traced back to balanced literacy and a handful of specific curriculum materials. That's not accurate. Like, one program, 2 programs did not cause all of our issues. Balanced literacy is actually not the model in most places across the country, nor is it in Massachusetts. And so that's not what caused us to have a reading problem. Another piece is that teachers don't always know what they're doing, and that they need high quality, as determined by these groups, to be able to do instruction the right way, and that they've been duped and that they've had false pretenses, and that's also not entirely accurate. That districts are wedded to outdated curricular and are doubling down. People are not doubling down on programs. They're trying to figure out what tools do teachers need to best reach the varied needs of students. And then the biggest concern is about a list of programs that are approved and who's made those decisions and how those decisions are made. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. So there's some assumptions of that movement that are a little tricky. The number one thing that we need to be thinking about is the science of reading is not settled. And the science of reading and the way it looks and happens in execution is not settled either. And so we need to constantly be reading the resources, looking at the materials, looking at both sides to see where the truth lies and what do we need to continue to move forward. So here is the Mass Literacy Guide. These are all the core components. You'll see foundational skills, engaging with complex text, writing, and then really, really important is oral language throughout. I believe you saw this when we talked about interventions last year. So this is what the Mass Literacy Guide says for our early literacy programs. This only goes through grade 3. There is no equivalent from the Department of Ed for grades 4 through 8. We've started that work. I chaired a committee around that, a small group session, and we just haven't seen it yet. So when the state says we need to teach foundational skills, we need to teach engaging with complex text, we need to teach writing, and we need oral language, this is what Lowell has purchased to do that. So we do have all of these resources here. I'm going to get into them a little more deeply in the slides. I just wanted you to have a visual that we have purchased resources and tools for all parts of the literacy curriculum.
So these are the names of actual products that you've purchased?
Yes,
Okay.
This is what we have here.
This is what's being used in Lowell currently.
Today, okay.
So this is not for what's available out there. This is currently what we have. So when we think about our literacy model, we have suggested time for phonemic awareness. We purchased a program for that. I'll talk about that. We have purchased phonics programs, which I have already mentioned. We have Letterland or foundations. When we think about interactive read aloud and writing about reading, that is grade level text exposure for every single student. So they are getting inclusive titles with grade level text across the year, multiple iterations of that, and thinking about that, talking about that, and then ultimately writing about that. And the writing about that is to standards-based prompts. So that interactive read aloud hits the complex text, the writing about reading hits the writing. We have a reading workshop model, and for that we've purchased units of study. We use a workshop model. I'm going to talk about that a little bit deeper. And then for writing, the same thing. We have a writing workshop model that writes across the 3 areas. So we have narrative writing, opinion or argument, and information.
And these bottom 2, reading and writing, are those for daily exercises as well?
Yes, this is daily. So
This is all
the
daily.
literacy block is big, especially K-2. It's very big because there are so many components. if you think about the standards for literacy, there are reading standards for reading informational text and for reading fiction text. There are writing standards, there are speaking and listening standards, and there are language standards. So there are big domains within just literacy.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Do all of the schools, all of the elementary schools have the same reading program? Or-
Yes.
So what is the?
Except for the phonics.
So what is the reading program that all the schools have?
Units of study, grades 1 through 4 for reading. Kindergarten all has the focus on K2 integrated units, with the exception of the Green Alge. That decision was made by that school years ago when they were in the bottom 10 percentile.
So units of study.
Yep. And then for writing, it's the same across. That's K through 4. It's actually K through 8 for those. And it's 1 through 8 for workshop, for reading.
Okay, so it's not, a Wonders program, it's not a Peggotty, it's not any one curriculum?
Units of study is a curriculum that comes in a box.
So sorry.
It's okay.
I don't know why we focused.
That's a lot of country music, I don't know.
Units of study is a box. It's a year-long scope and sequence. We do have Heggerty, but that's an additional, and that's not focused on reading comprehension. That's focused on phonological awareness.
And what does the Green Alge use?
For what?
Reading.
They use the units of study K through 4.
Okay,
The only difference at the Green Alge is the kindergarten.
okay.
And so the kindergarten, the entire curriculum is centers-based, and that is something that was a model curriculum in Boston, and years ago, Lowell, while I was still a principal, engaged in a grant where they allowed, they funded us to bring that model to the district level. And so at that time, I believe the Green Alge was just going through a school redesign grant for being an underperforming school, and they determined that that was not something that they were going to do in their improvement plan. So that is why that did not occur at that school.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, and I think, that program for kindergarten that was brought in from Boston, that was brought in based on teacher input, teacher feedback. And then it grew as a result of teachers hearing how it went at some schools and wanting more of it.
But that was just the kindergarten.
Yes.
Just kindergarten.
I will say the reason the district ended up, and that's back to the history of it, the reason the district ended up in the use of a workshop style balanced literacy format is because the Merkland was undergoing redesign work as being a level 4 school at the time, and they changed their reading program and got themselves, along with many other factors, I'm not attributing it only to the reading program, but they made a change and got themselves to get out of that designation, and as such the district had to prove that we could support it across the district. And so the Merkland could not be doing something in isolation to support their sustained improvement. It had to be part of a district plan. And that sort of started right about when I came. I wasn't here for that exact part.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So when we think about the original motion, the structured literacy versus the balanced literacy, they're not either or. You literally can't have one or the other, really. You kind of need it all, and that's where we've been trying to get at. The structured literacy is systematic. It includes the phonics pieces. It is explicit. It builds over time. That's the cumulative part. But you also need rich read alouds. You also need time to engage with complex text, and you need the writing about that. And so I try to marry in this slide how they fit together. And so we have purchased new text to try to increase our knowledge building in grades K through 2, particularly with our Let's Gather materials in 1 and 2 with the revisions of the new units. And so those are the pieces where they build over thematic pairings, text sets. So we're not saying don't use structured literacy. We're not saying only balanced literacy. We're really trying to have a comprehensive literacy model that hits all of those components from the Department of Ed's Mass Literacy Guide.
Would that become confusing?
You have to
create,
put a lot
right?
of pieces together, but if we look at the other options, there is not yet a program that incorporates all of those pieces together. So regardless of what we would end up with, should we choose something else, almost every program requires that you would have to supplement with some other additional program. So when we talk about evidence-based, I just want to make sure you all understand what that means in terms of the current frameworks that are out there and when you hear that in the media or in educational settings. Evidence typically refers to positive findings that have been demonstrated in multiple well-designed, well-executed studies, leaving little or no doubt that the positive effects are caused by the recommended practices. To put that clearly, you've seen it in experiments over and over again, and that's the evidence. When we hear it in respect to curriculum, it means that the curriculum developers try to align their practices into evidence-based practices. It does not mean that the impact of those programs have been studied. So we don't have any data, nor does the state, about whether the programs on their lists have made improvements in districts. If you go to their ratings, which I will also discuss a little bit later, in Curate, there are no impact ratings for any products in Massachusetts. If you go to Ed Reports and look at the list of approved curriculum there are no reports on whether they've been effective and or where. There's just not the evidence, or it doesn't exist yet. So when we think, yeah.
Well, isn't that contradictory to what it says, that
The first paragraph is what
Leaving
evidence
alone
should be.
positive effects are caused by the recommended practice?
That is what the general term evidence should be,
Oh.
yes.
But you're saying that they're saying these are evidence-based programs, but they have no impact
No impact ratings
rating.
or
They
no
haven't got
studies.
evidence to prove that it's got a positive impact.
Yes.
Because, I mean, they're taking the evidence of a whatever the study is and then trying to back into a curriculum that supports it and
Almost
reflects
always,
it.
there's no study yet.
Yeah,
They just haven't done it.
yeah.
Because it's too new?
I don't know why. I mean, we have a cursory slide today that we prepared with a very quick attempt to try to find some evidence that I'm going to show at the very end. But I'm not entirely sure why these big publishing companies are not producing that work.
I guess I have one more question in regards to this too. So say we have a teacher with a waiver now who's in these K through 2, 3, 4 positions. And how would they ever know, without having the appropriate background, how to pull all of the programming together so that they're able to effectively teach with all of the components, the science of reading?
Yeah, that's a great question. The way we've tried to make sense of that for them is that we have, well, first we have coaches in every building, and we have mentors through the LTA. But we do have a guideline in terms of a schedule of the components, the way that we showed you. And then we have a website that has all of the materials there. So the curriculum they're not creating, it exists. The Heggerty curriculum they're not creating, it exists, and we've purchased videos that they could use to watch for their own growth or to show directly to students. So we've tried to support both with, like, here's the shell, here's all the tools, here's a pacing guide, we have a scope and sequence, and then coaching in terms of how do you put teaching into practice. So when we think about phonics, I wanted to just make sure you saw the slides with the programs. Letterland is explicit, systematic, multisensory, and sequential. As I mentioned, Letterland has not yet been evaluated by Ed Reports. In order to be evaluated by Ed Reports, the publisher has to ask Ed Reports to evaluate them. They can only evaluate so many per year. They have asked. It is on the docket for 2025. Foundations is
This is
a,
everywhere but the Green Elch?
Foundations is at the Green Elch and
No, I'm
4
sorry, I
other
was still at
schools.
Letterland.
Letterland is not at the Green Elch.
Okay, so it's everywhere else but.
10 other
10
schools,
schools, 10 out of the 15.
Okay.
yes. Foundations is at 5 of our schools. That is also explicit, systematic, multisensory, sequential. It only partially meets expectations according to Ed Reports, and it's actually supposed to be used in conjunction with another reading program. That is Wilson-based, and so we often in the past have had Wilson as a tier 2 or 3 intervention for our students with special needs. Our phonological awareness curriculum, and this is the most widely used one across the entire country, is Haggerty, and that is all oral practice. And that's daily in our grades K through 2, and then as needed in our grades 3 through 6.
And all schools have this?
Yes. And they actually have it in pre-K as well.
And there's some type of study on it, isn't it? There must be a rating on it.
Yes, so phonological awareness is a strong predictor of students' later reading acquisition. So they need to be able to hear and manipulate the sounds. You can imagine that this is the piece of the component. An easy way to explain it is if you closed your eyes, could you do it? So there's no print typically associated with phonological awareness.
And the Haggerty is on the Mass DESI website as approved.
No.
under approved programs.
No.
It's not on the website? as
It
a
is not.
recommended one?
No, they do not evaluate these tools right now.
Oh.
I know they're not evaluated, but isn't it on their list of approved?
They don't have a list of approved per se, they only have tools that they have reviewed through Curate.
And I guess I'm saying Haggerty is on.
No, Haggerty has not been reviewed by the Department of Ed, or Ed
Curate.
Reports, or Curate. Curate is from the Department of Ed.
Okay.
They do not currently have a model to evaluate phonological awareness products. Not Ed Reports or Curate. Our interactive read aloud exposes all students to grade level text with scaffolding. These are the inclusive titles that we've purchased over the years. One side is the Let's Gather resources. One side are all the texts we've purchased on our own to try to make sure that we have inclusive titles at grade level expectations across. Yeah, that's just a sample. That's not the complete list, and that is a Lowell teacher. Our workshop framework for reading and writing is a workshop model. That's typically a mini lesson that's about 10 minutes. Students then read and write and are in small groups and receive specialized instruction based on their needs, and then they come back together for a share at the end, and that's true for both reading and writing. Workshop model is culturally responsive, and the reason for that is that it affirms students' backgrounds. They have choice reading material. We have inclusive multi-text, which you saw in the previous slide, and then small groups and reading conferences are tailored to what students need. So some of the criticisms that you often hear on the media are that we're teaching children to guess. We are not teaching children to guess. And the tools that we did have that had that in there have been removed. And so students are not using guessing as a way to look at the picture and confirm if that's the right word or not. They are being asked to slide through the words. And those changes go from kindergarten all the way through the rest of our grades. And so the next few slides just show you how the new units have revised to take out those practices.
The guessing.
Yeah.
So that's what we're looking at here, the revised, updated UOS.
Yes, for K, 1, and 2 across the 3 slides. And I included K because we do have one school that uses it. When we think about supporting students with text that they can access, we've added decodable text, which are texts that students would access after a concept has been taught in phonics to help grow readers. We have a balance of authentic text like you might see in the bookstore, and then decodable texts, which are very much like Pat had a nap and Cat had a nap. And so we're trying to think about, do we have both for our students, especially our students in K1 and 2, who are not yet reading traditional text on their own. So we've purchased jump rope readers, big sets of text that are culturally responsive for all of our schools, K through 2. We have decodables through our Reading A to Z access. We have decodables through our Lexia access. We have given schools money to purchase additional decodables, such as Flyleaf, Dandelion Press, Daffodil Hill. We've given schools money to purchase Heggerty decodable text. So we've tried to balance the books that we have for authentic reading purposes and possibly level text with decodable text. I will say that we've made a very large investment in decodable text for our schools, much to the point like colleague districts are envious of how much we've been able to spend and support our youngest readers. And decodable texts extend as our students might have reading troubles later in life, but this presentation is really about mostly early literacy. And so we want to think about when children are in a small group, when they're in a workshop model, we're learning skills and we're hoping that they can apply them independently, but that they're also working together. To that end, we also have inclusive libraries in classrooms for them to pull from, where they can choose some text. We have teachers providing text that children should be reading. So we're trying to make sure students have a balanced diet of different kinds of books across fiction and nonfiction, decodables, authentic text, sometimes predictable text to teach one-to-one correspondence. Sometimes it's alphabet cards because they don't yet know their letters. Our whole class mini lessons provide the explicit instruction and set the purpose for reading. So we might be teaching about finding strong evidence in 4th grade. We might be teaching about identifying compound words in a reading class, not necessarily in isolation for phonics only. We want to try our best to get to that comprehension piece. And so we're hoping that those skills transfer across the different components, right? So if we're teaching kids to slide through the sounds, we want to see that when kids are reading their books on their own, we want to practice some of those skills when they're in small groups. We've included book clubs starting in 2nd grade, growing through our 8th grades, actually growing through our high school now, because we want to make sure we have student choice and engagement. We want to make sure that we're supporting our cultural collectivism, which is extremely important for our Latinx population, as we learned this summer in leadership. We want to make sure that we're growing oral language. When book clubs are going well, you sit and you listen and you're in awe of the conversation that students are having. And so how do we assess where we're at with this? These are the same buckets: foundational skills, complex text, writing. Those are all of the areas we are assessing just as we are teaching into them. And so our main early literacy screening is the DIBELS. We do it online through a program called MClass. That is one of the only approved Department of Ed's screeners, and that's the one we're using. We are still using Fountas and Pinnell benchmark assessment because it measures students' oral reading and fluency, and we do not know of or see a product available that captures students actually reading. We are also using our writing about reading, as I mentioned, to monitor student comprehension. So they're listening to text, they're reading text, and they're writing in response to that. Students write across the genres. We're using rubrics to assess that as well. And we use iReady as a computer-based diagnostic for all students grades 1 through 8. We do not assess K using that tool. K teachers did not feel it was yielding enough information to be useful.
Is there a separate system you're using for K?
They still have DIBELS and they still have the benchmark assessment. And so each grade gets a assessment calendar, and it talks about the various components of what we are assessing and when. And so that exists for all of our grade levels, K through 4. And we adjust that each year based on feedback from staff. So when we were thinking that we were doing the benchmark too many times, we reduced it to twice a year for some grades. There's revision that will happen again at the end of this school year moving forward. And so how does this play out? Well, when we look at all that data, we look at all of the components of the map, and we have to make some decisions. Where do students need support? Do they need phonological awareness support? Do they need fluency support? Do they need high frequency word support? And they might need it all, but we have to look and see based on their data, where do we target first and then move from there. So we do use an MTSS model where we have tiered interventions, and we know that if kids need supports, they always need it in addition to, not instead of. This slide should be something you've seen before in terms of all of the tools we do have for reading interventions. I did add some of the ways that the instruction model goes. So Lexia is online, iReady, MyPath is online, and RazKids is online. We have that for any student that needs any of those programs. Leveled literacy intervention is small group, it's level based. We use that sometimes for kids who that's the right tool. We have UFly, which is small group structured literacy intervention. Again, some kids who need that get that. Some of the programs have their own intervention, so Letterland does have one. That is a small group structured literacy program. We've purchased Ravo in some schools for some groups. That originally is a special education tool, but we're using it with some general ed students who need additional support. We have small groups using the reading strategies. We've purchased that for every single school. And then the new units of study for grades 1 and 2 have a robust book that includes small groups across decoding and comprehension and fluency and vocabulary. So some schools are also using that. So in terms of reading interventions, I think we have the most tools you could possibly have for teachers to try to figure out which one best meets the needs of students. We are working on, if you see this, this might be the tool for that student. If you see this, because that's a lot of decision making, but usually those decisions are made in conjunction with coaches, with tutor support or special educators, or even our multilingual departments. So those decisions aren't usually made in isolation.
And are these all being deployed, like during that literacy block, this would be kind of a pull-out activity as students would get assigned this, or is it separate, additional?
Small groups should be happening for all students within that workshop block. If they need additional supports, we hope that that's in addition to.
Okay,
because
so
we know
added
if they're
time, not-
behind,
yeah.
we're trying to catch up and accelerate.
Mm-hmm. So it could be both?
It could be both,
Okay.
yep. We hope it's both.
Yeah, perfect world.
And so what have we done to support learning for our staff in terms of all of these shifts that I've gone through? Every building has a literacy coach. I would argue that they could always use more, but they have great resources in their building to come in and help think through lessons, model lessons, co-plan, co-teach, provide resources. We at central office, it's myself and 2 others in the literacy department now. We've done building-based residencies where we've gone in and modeled some lessons, done some co-teaching, released the responsibility to teachers, and we've provided ongoing PD for coaches and then as we need it for the units. We've provided keys to beginning reading PD for all of our teachers by the end of this year in K-3 in terms of reading acquisition, and that includes the science of reading. And we continue to provide PD each year for new teachers to Lowell. So if you start and you're in K-2 and your cohort's done, you're not out of luck, you just get brought in. We've offered a letters PD, which is an intensive program. It covers 2 years, it's 8 units, and that is also on reading acquisition and the science of reading. But when we looked at that program, the team at the time decided that was too intensive for everybody, so we've done 2 cohorts of that. We've provided PD for the school leaders, the ETCs, the school psychologists on reading acquisition, including science of reading and book clubs and what to look for in classrooms. This year we're doing advanced word study for grades 5 and 6, and keys to comprehension for grades 5 to 6. And then we've offered the Keys to Beginning Reading PD for special educators at our priority schools. Next year, our goal is to support 4th grade and our special educators who did not participate in letters, were not at priority schools, and would like some acquisition training. Yes, the middle school PD that we are offering, that Keys to Beginning Reading for special educators, was a result of our pandemic needs. We're seeing students who maybe didn't have a super strong phonics program. Their formative learning years were, in front of a computer in their, bedrooms. And so we're seeing that trickle up, and we're trying to, alleviate some of those needs there. So by training the special educators or the teachers, that's why they're getting advanced word study. And so what does this mean in terms of our programming? As you mentioned, there are tools that are being touted as high quality instructional materials. And so Ed Reports is the #1 tool right now that is determining that across the nation. They have a gateway system, and if you don't get through the gateway 1, you can never get through the rest. In order to get through the gateway 1, you need to have grade level complex text across the year in terms of a curriculum. So the 2 tools, the units of study and the Fountas and Pinnell curriculum, that are often the ones that are targeted for not meeting those expectations, they are not actually a tool that could be evaluated by this type of report, because that's not how a workshop model works. You have the units and you pick the text across the mentor text, and then students read lots of text. And so they're not a match. It's like trying to measure an orange with a ruler. They're just not the right fit. The tools on Ed Reports are almost all basals, or they're text sets. And we're just moving to the text set side. And then if they don't hit Ed Reports, then we're assuming that they're low quality. Again, as I mentioned earlier, there's no efficacy data either way, so we don't actually know if the tools that meet the Ed Reports expectations are working any better anywhere than the tools that did not. And then in order to be reviewed, I think, Eileen, you were asking this about Curate, that's the Massachusetts version, you have to be approved by Ed Reports first. So Massachusetts will not put it through until it's been passed by Ed Reports. And Curate's gonna undergo some revisions, I believe, based on the recent legislation in the state and Senate. And so we know curriculum is dynamic. There's a lot of pieces that go into that, and some of those pieces are the teachers, and some are the students, and some are the content. And we've got to try to figure out, like, looking at our students, looking at our data over time, is the tool meeting the needs? If yes, proceed. If not, let's think about a revision. But that's really the important piece. If we don't yet know that there's an impact on learning, why would we make switches? Why would we buy something in the numbers of millions for a district like our size if we have yet to see, does it work? And then the other piece is a lot of the tools are not culturally responsive. And so some of them have been rated culturally destructive. We did this work today, actually, looking at curriculum materials with the high school. And one of those tools had a unit that was noted to be culturally harmful. And so we've got to consider all of the pieces when we're looking at the curriculum to see, is it just because it's green, does that make it good? Does that make it right for our students? And so I think the piece that we want to caution, and these 2 researchers, sort of capture that, is if we're giving every single person the exact same thing, it's not targeted for everything. And so we don't want to, purchase a program because it is touted to cure all. We don't know that that's going to happen, and in fact, we probably know it will not. So what does our data in Lowell say? I pulled, 4 schools that have stronger comprehensive literacy models, and those schools are performing a special recognition to the Maury and their School of Recognition from the Department of Ed. The Maury principal will, tout the benefits of a strong workshop model and the ability to be responsive to students' needs. They also have a strong phonics program and are using the science of reading. They're using a comprehensive literacy model. And then when we think about this in the bigger context, I offer this slide because here's us compared to districts similar to us in either size or demographic. And if you look at the data, we're not underperforming. In fact, in most cases, we're outperforming. And the bold are the programs that are approved, and ours are the programs that are not. And so I caution around thinking about, do we need to throw everything out given the data? Or do we need to continue to follow the research, which, as I mentioned, is ever evolving, and see, do we still have the right tools? And if not, how do we grow and change? And we've done that all along.
Yes, that's it. Do we have any initial questions?
There was a lot of information there.
You still get to go right ahead, Jackie.
Thank you for that. I think it was very interesting and informative for me. I guess it's just kind of a basic question that I know I've been hearing for a few years now, and I mentioned it at one of our curriculum subcommittee meetings, maybe last year or the year before, hearing from our teachers across the district, different schools, concerns. I'm sorry, I'm not on?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So I guess I'd just say, what is your response to the feedback I'm hearing from teachers that...
I think we haven't yet, I think, had a real opportunity to sit with teachers and give them some of this information. And so sometimes I think it's the social media version of the science of reading and what's being published by the journalists that's leading the charge, and not knowing that we are constantly thinking about what is out there and trying to make the best decisions. If there was impact ratings for these tools and we saw that they're making changes and gains and improvements for students, we would buy that and jump on that tomorrow.
If I could just follow up, I guess what's concerning me is we have the people who are on the front lines delivering the materials, and if your answer is we haven't really had an opportunity to hear from them, that's concerning to me. I think that you could certainly, and you made a very good argument here, that this hype that really might not have a basis in reality, but these teachers have something to bring to the table that I think it seems, I can't even find the word, but to just say, oh, they're following the hype, it diminishes the fact that they're in the classroom day after day. So what are they seeing that is concerning? And if you if your answer was, well, I've talked to them and this is what I think about it, but to tell me you haven't talked to them, you haven't heard what their concerns are, is concerning.
So I'm sorry, I don't think I said I didn't hear. I don't think they've heard what we're doing on this side to try to help support that. So the first thing is we're trying to provide first the professional development, so all our teachers have the research-based information on how reading is acquired. That hasn't reached our grades 5, 6, 7, and 8 teachers until this year, and they're seeing real gaps based on the pandemic, different than we would have seen before. We also, because we're doing that, our opportunities to interface with teachers and pull them to do other things is limited, because the volume of our staff to do that PD requires multiple days of substitutes and multiple days of them being out. So Lowell was really strong with providing PD around every unit we launched, every unit we put out, every unit teachers would interface with students in their classrooms right up to the pandemic, to the point where like Groton was coming to watch what we were doing, okay? Pandemic comes, we've got a crisis for a couple of years, we've got to figure it out. We start to offer the PD on how reading is evolving and reading acquisition. That's taking all of our time. We can't simultaneously now support units and how you might adjust it. And I don't say we can't because we don't have the, knowledge or the capacity, but the bandwidth is really challenging in terms of number of subs and number of days it takes to do a single training. For example, if I would like to offer a PD for grade 2, for all grade 2 teachers, only mainstream teachers, not our multilingual teachers, not our sub-separate programs, not our special educators. It takes 3 full days of PD to cover just mainstream teachers because we have a limited number of subs we can pull each day, and we need to make sure everybody gets it. This course is 36 hours. They're coming downtown 4 days already, times 3 days for each one. Every grade we do, plus we have to think about special educators, plus we have to think about other content across the district. So supporting teachers with the theory of reading acquisition, and then the implementation science is like our next step. How do we merge it all together in this new environment post-pandemic? We just don't have the days, times, subs to be able to do that all at once in a district as big as ours. So we're trying to fill things in. We know the units had some problems. We purchased the new units. We're trying to build support for PD through the coaches, hoping that gets to the buildings, knowing we need to offer more for teachers next year because now they've had reading acquisition, now they've got new revisions. How does that make sense? So I think the messaging part of what we've been doing and the fact that it is ever evolving and ongoing, that is the part that doesn't always get to the teachers. And so the hype is constant and present from the media, and there isn't a vehicle for us to be able to deliver this message yet. We have, recently talked about offering some sit-in hours where teachers come and bring concerns, but we also get to share the information that you're all getting tonight. These are the things we're doing. And so a little bit of that still needs to happen. And we recognize that and had those conversations.
Do we have the opportunity? I come back over and over again in these last few years to the funding that we have available right now is unlike anything we've had in decades. And it seems like there are opportunities that we will only have right now because we have these resources. And they're about to wrap up. So, honestly, the window is closing. Is there any kind of thought of pulling together professional development opportunities that have, that have benefits attached to them for teachers that would, outside of the school day, so that it's not, you don't have to rely on subs, outside of maybe even the school year, so that you're not impacting classrooms, that there's a summer institute that has a dollar figure attached to it, that would be appealing for teachers and would help us raise the level of performance.
Yeah, I think those would be great opportunities.
More money. Honestly,
Yeah.
it's not a brilliant idea, but it just seems like, and I understand the challenge of trying to make an unworkable situation work. There are finite resources, time, and all that, but the time we have with students is also finite. And if we don't fix this problem, we all know by grade 3, it may never get fixed for those individual students, and that's really what's driving the I think a lot of the angst. I'm sorry.
And I think to your point, I think we've explored lots of different models, right? Could we come to school 2 days or 3 days before school starts? Could there be other days during the year that there is students are not in school, however, staff are? We found that the professional development day on the election day has been helpful. However, there's only 3 people in the literacy office, and every year they're pre-booked by the summer by principals to be in their schools doing this kind of work. And so I think to your point, that is what's necessary, is having, isolated time where it's not, kind of cutting into instructional time of our students to be able to consistently message. And I think that's what
Melissa was trying to get at around being able to have the time of teachers to consistently message what's happening, what is the data across the state. Again, you're seeing similar school systems here. We are outperforming those school systems, and we have not transitioned to some of the state-approved curriculum, which they have. If we were to transition, we would have to make a significant investment in materials, but we'd also have to do all of the professional development across all of the grade levels as well. And so, either way, we have to have opportunity and time with teachers to be able to provide support, either way. And I think that's what we lack, is those times to really have with teachers. And, as Melissa has said, we have been committed as a department to, when we offer time for teachers to learn, that there is a component where they have time at the end of the day, at the end of the professional development, to talk to their colleagues in that professional development session and share ideas. And so, it's not only about conveying knowledge to people, but it's also having opportunities for them to work across other schools and get the best ideas and thought partnering amongst their colleagues, because the thought partnering with us isn't that important. It's really what's working in schools and what other people are doing that they can share best practices and best ideas. So to your point, I think that any opportunities that we would have to be able to work with teachers to professionally develop would be extraordinarily important. But in the current system, it's such an impact to the schools to take people out of the schools that we have tried to do things in different ways. And oftentimes that means voluntary professional learning opportunities. And we don't always get everybody because there are other commitments that people have.
Did you have a
How long has the science of learning sort of been in the conversation for? It sounds like, the newspapers are writing about it.
So the science isn't entirely new. As I mentioned, there's a phonics versus whole language versus how students learn to read. That's why they're called the reading wars. That's existed for a really long time. The science of reading as gaining traction the way it has this iteration and with the new brain research has been evolving since about 2018 and really gained traction post-pandemic time frame.
Okay.
So as the state started to make some of those shifts with that mass early literacy guide, that's also when it was sort of growing. Ed Reports as an actual organization has only existed since 2015.
Okay.
There were other approved programming clearinghouses. What Works Clearinghouse was sort of the gold standard before. If you got approved through that you were making good choices, and that's no longer the case in the current climate.
And I heard you say pre-pandemic that Groton was sort of, looking at us to sort of come and see what how our reading and how our phonics and how our program was working so well. So, but then we sort of lost, as Massachusetts lost track of their students did during the pandemic, and all of a sudden we find ourselves behind.
Yeah, so as Robin mentioned, our PD model used to be anytime we asked teachers to use something new, we would do some training around what it was, how to use it, how it might look with kids. We'd have them experience it. I mean, I think all of these audience members have been participants in that kind of PD. And then as Robin mentioned, the afternoon would be about like looking at what we just learned. How will we implement this with our students across their school, but they were also here with other schools. That model was really strong in making sure teachers knew what to teach and when. And then we had 2 years of pandemic time when we couldn't do any of that work really. And then science of reading stronger, now we're trying to build the theory. And so that work where we're supporting the individual teaching components is happening in small doses when schools ask us. So we might take, school will give us 2 hours, we'll come in and help launch that unit with your grade level. And those have been wildly successful and teachers really enjoy and appreciate them. But as Robin mentioned, there's 3 of us, and the schools have to request that because that's a need that they have. And so if a school doesn't avail of that, then we also don't just show up to give them PD.
Sure. And Ms. Martin asked about, if we had after schools, teachings, project, professional development, or summertime when we wouldn't be affecting students and such. Would it be beneficial to sort of try to move forward with what we've been doing, or would it be sort of more beneficial to sort of move away and, see, what this type of project would do to benefit our curriculum? What would sort of be more beneficial in your eyes?
I think any opportunities to offer consistent, cohesive professional development is what we should be doing. We've had lots of staff turnover in the last several years, and so there's staff that have been here a long time that have been able to experience some of the former models of professional development that we have been able to offer. But there are lots of staff that have come in, and as Melissa has said, we've been offering professional development to catch new staff members up on how to use the curriculum, but they're not with their cohort coming and learning and having those opportunities to work with their teams around that afternoon session where they're talking about how it's working and how they're sharing resources and collectively collaborating around the implementation. But I do think that in order to be able to offer the professional development that I hear Ms. Martin mentioning, and the professional development we would love to be able to provide whole district, it really, I think, would be a conversation with our union partners around, how would that work and how would that be supported, along with, the administration around, finance and overall system-wide goals. So, we can only speak to our department and what we would love to be able to do, but it's a greater conversation, I think, with the entire team.
Sure, that's understood. Thank you.
Yes, by all means.
Just speaking as a parent in the district as well, I see my child go from having all of this explicit instruction in elementary to go into the middle school, and it falls apart. It does not happen, and it's not that anything else changed, but as you were saying, having consistent, cohesive chances for professional development, I think we need a consistent, cohesive curriculum that tracks from kindergarten to grade 8, because our kids are getting lost, and it's really becoming an epidemic overall, and in terms of reading. And so I guess that's the one thing that I would suggest, but thank you.
I do want to address one piece of that, in that we do have a consistent curriculum from K through 8 for both reading and writing. The implementation of that at the middle school often varies because our turnover in the last 4 years has been the greatest in middle school than it has in elementary. But we also know that in middle school there is a greater need for some of the early literacy skills that we have not seen previously. And so where we have noticed that, we are working to provide the PD on ways for teachers who are middle school teachers who may never have taken a reading course in their training or ever, to give them some strategies and tools to be able to reach those students, and making sure that the interventions they have fill and accelerate some of those, but in the mainstream, we're working to make sure those teachers have those skills too, because the needs of the students have shifted. I will say we still have a need to find a strong word study program for grades 4 and 5 in particular, because they still have foundational studies, but we are not focused on phonics anymore for the most part if your typical grade develop. The tricky piece with that in terms of finding a word study program is that that's not part of the evaluation process by any of these companies, and nobody knows one that's very good yet. And so every time the state has a literacy leader meeting, we're all asking who's got a really good word study program, and no one has one that they love. And so to spend millions of dollars on something that might be subpar, it feels really challenging. But I know there's a need that we need to figure something out for those grades.
And that's just like rote learning, like just learning words.
It's like morphology. It's the evolution. It's the evolution of like phonics. So it's like morphology, root words, base words, how to approach multisyllabic words, because that's really where, when readers can't decode well, it starts to fall apart because there's so much more to do. And so a tool for that isn't always something that all students need, but we do know that a large portion of our students need it, particularly post-pandemic. So that is something that we are looking into. It is on the radar. Trying to find one that is successful is a challenge.
What about the half days? Why can't we start implementing the specific reading on half days? I don't know where it became like principals got to develop the agenda, over time. But if we come back to the half days and really implement this training that's desperately needed for reading, again, just another suggestion.
But I will just go back to the professional development slide that in 2023-24 school year, which is this current school year, we did the advanced word study and keys to comprehension for all grades 5 and 6 teachers. Typically in the middle school, vocabulary development is what occurs in the literacy blocks, and reading grade level texts is what occurs in the literacy blocks. Not typical in the middle school do you see advanced word study and keys to developing reading early literacy skills, right? And that's
because they should be done. They should have been completed.
It should have been completed. Yeah. And so I think, to your point, you're seeing some differences in what the middle school experience is for early readers, and we recognize that teachers need those tools to be able to meet the needs of the students that they're receiving based on sort of what their experience had been during the 2020-2021 school year. And so we are really trying to equip teachers in the middle school with those early literacy skills, but that is not typical. That's not what typical middle school ELA teachers have experienced in their course of study. And so we are trying to provide that. And that is something that we've had to use subs to bring teachers to central office as a whole cohort to have that professional development. But again, it interrupts Tier 1 instruction for kids when we take teachers out for a large amount of time to learn. So it's that balance. It's constantly that balance of how do we do those things and not interrupt instruction. Okay.
Do we really? You're done? Any other comments before we do wrap up? Yes.
Thing, and I do apologize for the length of this, but I did feel like instead of submitting a report to the school committee for the motion, it would make sense to give this background knowledge and information to the subcommittee ahead of it, so that when I do submit the response to the motion, it will make more sense to people who are receiving that report, because that will not be a slide deck with lots of information. It will be a content report, and so that will still be forthcoming. But I just thought this was a good opportunity to share this information.
Exactly the thought behind the motion.
Definitely. Yeah. I think that's the purpose of the subcommittee too,
right,
to be able to do a deeper dive.
Absolutely.
We appreciate it. As much time as it took, we greatly appreciate it.
No worries.
I thank you for the time to give you all of the pieces, and so that you have a snippet of what everybody else has been getting.
Beautiful. So I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Bahu, seconded by Ms. Doherty. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Thank you all for the time. Thank you.